Welcome, members, friends, and new listeners to the Global Justice Report, a new online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand. I will be your host today for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world. Since 2004, we've been offering educational programs in English for expats and visitors, and programs in Spanish for the Mexican community. We've also organized educational travel to Chiapas and to Cuba. Our vision is to move control of economic life and relations with Mother Earth from the 1% to the 99%. I want to open today with just a second, let me fix this screen here. Nope. I want to open our session today by honoring two comrades who have died in the last week. Kevin Zeese died this weekend. He was an activist, one of the, I was going to say leaders, but no, the Occupy doesn't have leaders. He was one of the moving forces in the Occupy Wall Street in Washington, D.C., and has gone on to be a leading activist in many ways since then. We worked with him in connection with the campaign against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and he was an important participant in the Moving Beyond Capitalism conference that we had here in San Miguel. What was that, 5 years ago, I guess. He and his partner, Margaret Flowers, were an exceptional team, a model of an activist couple whose lives were devoted to promoting social justice and opposing imperialism. So we're really going to miss Kevin, and I know that Margaret is grieving for him also. His death was unexpected. The other death that occurred this last week was also unexpected. David Graeber. David is a prominent anarchist, had the unusual distinction of being a rare anarchist who received an obituary in the New York Times. But he died unexpectedly, or at least we didn't know that he was ill or anything in Vienna. He was the author of many books and was also reportedly the author of the slogan, "We are the 99%." So his energy, indeed the energy of both David Graeber and Kevin Zeese, will be sorely missed. Coronavirus has set in relief the failures of neoliberal capitalism. Our weekly Global Justice Report will explore various grassroots democratic solutions, including self-management, cooperatives, mutual aid, public banking, and much, much more. We will be taking questions after today's presentation. If you have questions for the speaker or comments, you can send them by email to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. and I will then present them. We have a couple of our speakers' colleagues here in the Zoom room with us, and they will be able to present their questions or comments live. But the rest of you will have to send them through an email to this address. If you, by the way, if you have suggestions for future webinars that you would like to see or speakers you would like to hear, you can send your suggestions to this same email address. Our speaker today is Rebecca Eichler. She's an immigration attorney. She has 20 years of experience as an immigration attorney, working with clients from around the world seeking protection under U.S. and international law. She has aided deported Mexicans and their U.S. U.S. citizen families in coping with their expulsion from the U.S. and establishing legal status in Mexico, a country where, despite their Mexican heritage, many have never lived. She spearheaded the Guanajuato and Queretaro legal aid response to the Central American caravans that transited through Mexico in the fall of 2018. She assembled a team of lawyers and provided individual legal consultations and know your rights presentations to hundreds of migrants on what to expect at the US border. Rebecca Eichler advised individuals, including unaccompanied minors, waiting at the border in Tijuana and Matamoros on the legal requirements of asylum in the US, and mentally and physically prepared and walked with children to present themselves for US Customs and Border Protection detention. So as an immigration attorney, she has definitely hands-on experience. And we look forward to hearing her update on the status of immigrants and asylum seekers seeking to enter the US. Take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Cliff, and thank you for having me today. It's an honor to speak with your group today. Let me get to my slides. So, yes, as Cliff said, I'm talking today about the status of asylum seekers at the border, but I also find this topic incredibly depressing. So we're going to end hopefully on an up note by also telling you, showing the inspiration that I find in the work that I do. As Cliff mentioned, I started off, I moved to Mexico only about 3 years ago, and within a short amount of time, I found myself in the middle of the migrant caravans that you may recall was happening in the fall of 2018 during the US midterm elections. This is what the caravan looked like. There was actually several of them that came through, of thousands and thousands of people. I think the first one had probably about 5,000 people in it. The second caravan had about 3,000. You can see that there's a lot of children. There's women with babies. Everybody was carrying all of their belongings in their hands, doing what they could to move forward as quickly as possible to get to the US. As part of this, I set up a mobile legal aid station, also known as my van, and provided individual consultations for those of you who are familiar with San Miguel, this is in Queretaro at the stadium there.
Rebecca, we're not seeing your screen share.
Oh, okay. That's probably because I did not. Thank you. Let's see, where am I in Zoom? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Share screen, there we go.
No, here it's coming up now. Okay.
All right. Well, you didn't see all my pretty screens then, my pretty signs. I'll start over. Here we go. My name is Rebecca Eichler, and there's my introductory slide. And here's the video of the the caravan that I was referencing. It's only 30 seconds, so you'll get to see what I was talking about. Cliff, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So here you can see the thousands and thousands of people, and they were literally just walking. They had walked from, most of the people were from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, the Central Triangle. There are also Mexicans in the groups that I spoke with, and they were mostly walking. Some people were lucky enough to catch rides in buses, on backs of trucks, but you know, they had everything that they owned carrying in their hands. Here's my mobile legal aid office. And now we're getting to the part about the update for asylum seekers in the US. I can sum it up the status of asylum in the US simply. The Trump administration has achieved what it has always wanted, which is ending asylum in its entirety and closing the border to asylum seekers. Before I start, I want to make one very, very important point, which is that asylum, the seeking of protection from another country, is international protection for people whose lives are threatened. Requesting asylum in a foreign country is a right. It is a human right. The asylum system was created in the aftermath of World War II, after Nazis persecuted and killed 6 million Jews and other undesirables. And the United States was instrumental in creating this system. The whole purpose of asylum law is to give exhausted, traumatized, and uninformed individuals a chance to seek protection from harm and to get a full hearing under the US immigration court system. So unfortunately, thanks to 3 years of policies that have chipped away at existing legal protections for asylum seekers, and now exploiting the coronavirus crisis, the US is achieving the hardline anti-immigrant agenda that Trump and Stephen Bannon, or is it Stephen Miller? Both of those are horrible people, that they've always wanted. So what I'm talking about is things like this. It's been an increasingly cruel process. It started pretty much from day one that Trump came into office, and it's just gotten worse and worse. It started basically with the policy with the Orwellian name of migrant protection protocols. Those of you unfamiliar with Orwell, he's using words that totally mean the opposite of what they're actually doing. There is no way that what is happening, what the US policies are protecting anybody. Practitioners and other immigrant advocates are calling these the migrant persecution protocols. What it does is it requires asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their cases to make their way through the US immigration court system, which you can imagine, or I hope you can imagine, it's pretty much a Herculean task. It's almost impossible to adequately prepare for an asylum case when you can't even speak to your lawyer, when you don't have a lawyer, when you have no resources. So we're talking about 60,000 refugees who are asking for life-saving protection from the US, and they're being forced to wait in dangerous border towns for their day in court. And during this time, they have minimal access to any sort of legal advice or counsel or assistance. These kangaroo courts, which is basically what they're doing, are literally intense. And this is right across the border from Matamoros, Mexico, in Brownsville, Texas. And they have these big tents set up, which are, well, I want to make a point also that right now, all of these have stopped. The US government using coronavirus has put a halt to these tent courts and indefinitely postponed everybody's hearings. So this is what was happening prior to March. These legal proceedings, completely a sham. They're set up to give the impression of a fair legal process, but there are rampant due process violations. The hearings take place in secret. They're not allowed to have any legal observers. No press is allowed. The public is not allowed to view the proceedings, and the vast majority of people who are in proceedings are unrepresented. They have interpretation on a screen, much like what we're doing right now. The judge appears on a screen. the immigration attorney appears, or the government attorney appears on a screen, and the interpreter is all remote. And the asylum seeker is in this tent basically by themselves. Many people get, if you don't show up for your hearing, they would be ordered deported in absentia, meaning without their presence there. And the reasons that people would not show up are if they're kidnapped. They're living in incredibly dangerous conditions on the border and with no stability and no security. And people have, it's not uncommon for asylum seekers to be kidnapped while they're waiting for their day in court. This whole setup violates US and international laws in many ways, and most specifically the MPP program, which requires people to be in Mexico, violates the policy or the idea of non-refoulement, which means that you cannot return people to a place where they may suffer a harm. That is written into international law, that is part of US law, and the US is doing it. So the US government is completely violating the laws by returning people to a place where they might be harmed. We've also had cases where people, even when they win their hearing, when they win asylum in the US, they are still sent back to Mexico. So the human rights violations, the legal violations are completely rampant. Just to put this in perspective of what this is, these tent courts, the US paid $25 million to build 2 of these tent courts in Brownsville, Texas. And prior to COVID, the government was ramping up doing this. So it's an unconscionable and illegal process that was happening and has only been put on pause because of the coronavirus pandemic. Right as of today, all hearings, as I mentioned, have been postponed indefinitely, and we have no idea when they're going to start up again. So people who have legitimate concerns and are seeking legitimate protection from the US have no means of accessing this protection. It's really unconscionable, but the bottom line is that the US is not open for asylum for people. In Matamoros, this is a picture from literally the border of Matamoros, Mexico to Brownsville, Texas. Early in the refugee tent camp thing, they were camped out literally right there on the border. And they do so because to go any farther away from this border is simply too dangerous. It's safe within about 100 feet of the border, but beyond that, the area is controlled by cartels and all sorts of other violent criminals. People get kidnapped from their tents in the tent camp. People are routinely robbed and kidnapped for money. There really is no large international NGO presence. There's very little support from the Mexican government here. The migrants who are at these tents, sleeping in these tent camps, are completely reliant on nonprofit organizations. There are 3 working at this camp here in Brownsville or in Matamoros that I know of. There's the Global Response Management, which provides medical care for them. Team Brownsville is a group of US volunteers who used to come across and bring food to people sleeping in tents. Things have gotten a little bit shaken up now because they can't do that. But the Global Response Management, the doctors, and there's the Resource Center Matamoros that they provide. They've spent a lot of their donations putting gravel down where you can see these are dirt paths literally along the banks of the Rio Grande River. And it's hurricane season now. So they spent a lot of money shoring up just the infrastructure. They've installed porta potties. There are showers there. It's a lot cleaner than at the beginning. There used to be, I think, like 12 porta potties for thousands of people. Now there's a lot more, and there's also fewer migrants who are living there. Right now there's about between 1,000 and 1,500 people still living in tents. I want to make the point again that this is a flood zone right on the banks of the Rio Grande. There was a hurricane a couple weeks ago that hit very badly, and people's homes are destroyed. The residents of the camp are extremely vulnerable to all the elements, as you can imagine, living in a tent. I like to camp, but I'm not sure that I would want to live there for indefinitely. Lower courts in the US have found the migrant protection protocol illegal, but the Supreme Court has allowed the program to continue. That it's not usual that once the lower court finds it illegal, the Supreme Court usually issues a stay, which means that they can't keep doing whatever they're doing. The Supreme Court has said that the MPP can continue. And in typically Trump chaotic fashion, there's a lot of confusion because people don't know what's going on. They have court dates with the date of September, and they don't know, they don't have access to information that their hearing has been postponed. So it's just a really unconscionable situation that, living situation that people are enduring right now. Starting in March, the Trump administration using COVID, using the emergency public health measures, Customs and Border Patrol has broad authority to just completely bypass immigration laws. They're expelling asylum seekers who cross illegally in an average of 96 minutes. So people who have walked across multiple international borders present themselves to a CBP official. They say that they're afraid, and in about an hour and a half, they find themselves in detention or back in Mexico. In this process, the agents record, they just take their personal data, biometric information, and then they load them into vans for rapid return to the nearest border crossing. In addition, prior to COVID, the Trump administration had instituted a couple of blatantly illegal agreements with El Salvador and Guatemala. They signed safe third country agreements requiring migrants to pass through those countries, Guatemala or El Salvador, to have applied for and been denied asylum in those countries before that they could be eligible for asylum in the US. And it allows the US to send people back to those countries under the spurious understanding that people will get protection in those countries. Prior to these agreements with El Salvador and Guatemala, the US had one third country agreement with only one other country, which was Canada. The whole purpose behind that is saying Canada provides an equal level of protection to asylum seekers that the US does. Therefore, if they are in Canada, they should apply there. That is by far not even close. It's not even close to what the reality is with Guatemala and El Salvador, given that most of the asylum seekers are from those countries. Because of these safe third country agreements, people are from those countries are put on planes and sent there pretty quickly. And what's happening is now we're exporting COVID to those countries. When somebody gets in touch with, when an asylum seeker comes in contact with a CBP officer, there is not, in order for them to trigger humanitarian protection, they have to affirmatively state that they're afraid to return home. Official policy says that they're not even asked if they're afraid. So unless somebody knows what to say, they don't even get put into the right channels in order to get protection. There's no medical exams performed unless the person is in actual distress. One thing that you'll hear immigration practitioners say is that the cruelty is the point here. This whole idea of, requiring people to affirmatively raise that they're afraid, that's cruel. We're talking about hundreds of unaccompanied children who should be given extra protection have also been expelled this way. At last count, there were 400 unaccompanied children who were immediately expelled at the border without the required extra assistance that they should be getting because they're unaccompanied and because they're minor. Again, cruel. Since the pandemic, since the emergency public health measures were declared in the middle of March, a total of 2 people were granted protection in the United States out of 59 people who had been screened for certain protection under the Convention Against Torture, which is generally supposed to be a catch-all. It's to say you're going to go home and you'll be tortured, and the US government is supposed to assess their case and if they don't reach asylum, then they get CAT, Convention Against Torture screening. So 2 people this year have been granted that. To compare it, in 2018, approximately 13,000 people were granted CAT protection. So this is how the administration has shut down and eliminated asylum. In the interior of the United States, the situation is not much better. Asylum seekers are detained and treated as animals, and they're in jail. Keep this in mind that the US government has consistently failed to provide even the most basic of public health protections. No soap, no hand sanitizers inside of detention centers. So these things put people at even higher risks, and especially those with underlying health conditions. And so migrants in detention are at very high risk of contracting COVID and even dying from that and any number of minor ailments that other people who have access to health protections and to sanitation would not even have to deal with. ICE protocols do not identify people who might be at higher risks, and much less they don't take significant steps to reduce the risk of contagion. Again, the cruelty is the point. There are right now class action lawsuits that are challenging these policies, and we're even winning some of them, but frankly, it's not enough. There's been an alarming spike in confirmed COVID cases inside of detention centers. As an example of what's happening in the privately run Otay Mesa Detention Center in California, before issuing detainees masks, the privately run prison required people to sign a form relieving them of liability from harm from COVID before they would get a face mask. So ICE has released some people, approximately 700 detainees, but that's out of 34,000 people who are in, and they've consistently resisted large scale release for health reasons. On top of that, the Trump administration has upped its propaganda machine, which is really what it is. It's a propaganda machine. They recently released a video via the Customs and Border Patrol website, blatantly racist video as a PR thing, portraying a Hispanic migrant who had not been caught coming across the border and then cruelly murdering a US citizen. So this is the framework that we're looking at. This is how the administration has always framed and is continuing and is ramping up the vilification of migrants and asylum seekers. So what's happening is that the United States is completely abandoning our legal commitment to provide asylum to people whose lives are in danger in other countries. Again, the cruelty is the point. I like this quote. In these dark times and doing this really depressing work, the only thing that I can think of is what Mr. Rogers' mom told him, is to look for the helpers, that you'll always find people helping. And in the work that I've done, I have been very, very inspired and very fortunate to work with people who are helpers. As Cliff mentioned in an introduction, for the caravans, I was able to recruit, there was actually 4 of us lawyers who flew down from the US on very short notice, and they slept with me in the van, and we worked for 2 very, very long days. They were willing to come and to help. And I've been doing this work for a very long time in very challenging situations. I've worked with Colombian asylum seekers in Ecuador. I've worked with domestic violence survivors in Cambodia. And it has never been as hard as it is now to do my job as it has been in the last 3 years. And in fact, it's been hard to be a sentient and caring human being in the last 3 years. I'll give you that. Every one of us has felt tired and overwhelmed and defeated. And we look at what's happening in the United States and the world, and it feels like what little we're doing is so inconsequential. And in the caravans, as Cliff said, I did talk to hundreds of people, but that means that there was thousands and thousands that I did not talk to. And what I take from this, though, is that I wasn't alone. I had these really great people helping me. when I was not able to find lawyers, the second round of caravans, I had local friends here, Mexican friends who came and helped distribute goods and helped corral people while I was able to provide consultations to individuals. It wasn't just, time. There was so many people donated money so that we could buy things like strollers and diapers and food. Strollers were very popular because it helped migrants push their things and carry their children, transport their children, even though they're walking on dirt roads. Local expats from the San Miguel community, friends came out, they brought food and clothes and shoes, just all sorts of assistance, support that we got. This is a picture of a Mexican family that brought tamales and chocolate, hot chocolate and coffee in the morning. The caravans, they were leaving at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and people showed up before dark, and they showed up at night, and they brought food and they brought blankets and they brought things. And everybody was doing what we could do to help out. And you can see these are just, families who are walking with their teddy bears. I can imagine the conversation that the family had with this little boy, whether to bring his Winnie the Pooh doll or not, when they were leaving their home with everything that they had. Another means of transport, another way that migrants have been getting to the United States is via the train called La Bestia, which, as those of you who are here in San Miguel know, it goes right past here. You'll hear the train whistles. They ride on top of the trains, which is a very, very dangerous means of transportation, because the trains now, under pressure from the Trump administration, the Mexican government has also become more cruel. The trains used to slow down as they approach certain areas, and now they don't. I've personally witnessed where the railway company has installed concrete ballards right alongside of the trains, so that if anybody is just hanging off the side of the train, they will get hit and knocked off, suffer amputations, even death, while they're just riding the trains. In response to this, there is a migrant shelter here in neighboring Celaya, Albergue ABA, which is run by an amazing humanitarian by the name of Pastor Ignacio Martinez Ramirez. And he is in one of these pictures. He'll be in a picture. But again, the albergue, the migrant shelter, doesn't run on its own. It runs with the support of lots and lots of people in San Miguel and around the world who believe in the work that they're doing and believe in the mission of Pastor Ignacio, which is to restore the dignity to every one of the humans who passes through his doors. During COVID, many of the shelters in Mexico have shut down, and Albergue ABA is only one of a handful, maybe 3 shelters who continues to offer accommodation and respite for tired migrants who continue to pass through. They have instituted, you can see in the pictures, everybody's wearing masks, and there's the Red Cross has provided instructions on sanitation and how to keep clean in these times, and how to, to do what we can do to stop the spread of COVID. And even ABA is helped incredibly by relationships and agreements with other organizations such as the Mexican Red Cross and the International Red Cross. As I mentioned, there's the people on the trains who fall off of the trains, who get pushed off the trains, who get knocked off the trains. And this migrant shelter is literally right next to the train tracks, and they are in a position to accept amputees, and they are the only shelter in Mexico that provides prostheses to migrants who have suffered amputations. Through this arrangement with the International Red Cross, those organizations provide the medical care, they provide the prostheses. Albergue ABA provides the support and accommodation while they're recovering from their injuries. So there are lots of different things that ABA is doing, and with the support of others. This is a picture of my friend Charlene. She's the woman in the orange shirt, kind of in the back, smiling widely. She was the first lawyer to come help me when I put out a call for help back in November. And she has been doing this work even longer than I have. She is an amazing warrior. And right now she is in, well, right now she's not, but she works out of Brownsville, Texas, and helps people get across the border. So this family had children, and there, you know, obviously some sort of special circumstances that warranted their crossing the border to get them out of the MPP program. And Charlene works tirelessly every single day to help and to advise people and to help people, you know, get at least some sort of access to the legal aid so that they can have a chance of getting asylum in the United States. This whole thing, there's so much to think about and so much to, you know, what can we do? You're doing it right now. If you're not stepping up to the plate, you're not going to step up to the plate. But I know that everybody watching here, because you care, you're doing something. And as another example of what I've heard recently, and this is probably going to make me cry. This woman she's Vicky Bruce, and she had heard my presentations in the past. And so it was on her radar to do something. She met a Cameroonian man in Tijuana, and she started talking to him. She started working with him. She's a documentary filmmaker. She hired him to do some work for her, and then through him got to know a group of friends that he had been traveling with, or a group of people that he had made friends with in his journey. Right now, there are a lot of Cameroonians who are seeking asylum in the US, and they are currently in Mexico, and they have a journey of epic proportions. So what's happening in Cameroon is there's civil unrest between the majority Francophone, the French speakers who run the country, and a minority of English speakers. And so there's conflict, they're on the verge of a civil war. The government is cracking down violently and oppressively and causing a lot of people to leave. Cameroonians do not need a visa to fly to Ecuador. So they fly from Cameroon to Ecuador. And this man that she is hugging, it took him a year to get from Ecuador to Tijuana. And to give you an idea of how far that is, to get from Ecuador to Tijuana is the same distance as from Los Angeles to New York and back. And for the most part, these people are walking this distance. It takes a year to do that. And in that year, they have to avoid criminal elements. They have to avoid corrupt government and military officials. They're crossing borders, all in a search for safety and security. Vicky met this person, and actually this is not the person that she met. She met this person, you can't see either one of them, but they were in detention in the US, and she has single-handedly recruited a group of people to fund their bond to get out of immigration detention, and has offered them a place to stay with her in Maryland, where she lives. And another person that she recruited is also doing the same thing. So but the two gentlemen in the picture now have at least a fighting chance of getting asylum in the US, just because somebody stepped up and said, I'm going to help. And certainly I'm not asking you to take in an asylum seeker, although if you did that, that would be amazing. And I'll give you resources on how to do that. But going back to this thing that Mr. Rogers' mom said, I'm going to change it and encourage everyone here to be a helper. You know, this was advice that she gave to children who find themselves in scary situations. Look for the helpers, because there's always somebody going to be helping. But now we are adults, and we have the capacity to be a helper. So I'm going to encourage everybody here watching to do something, be a helper, do something positive. And what does that mean? There are lots of ways. I've limited this to 3 things right now, because I can give you a whole list of places to donate to, and I realize I didn't add onto here, but right now, unless you are a Spanish-speaking immigration attorney with experience doing asylum, that's a very concrete thing, a very narrow focus. But there are lots of things you can do, and the biggest impact is for you to financially support the people who are doing the work, the people who do have the tools and the experience to do it. So any one of these organizations, the ABBA shelter in Celaya is supported by the Latin American Relief Fund, who has helped to purchase the building and now is moving into providing long-term educational opportunities, because the recognition is that Mexico has transitioned from being a transit country, meaning a country that asylum seekers are just getting through on their way to the US, to being a destination country. The US has, like, as I said, shut its doors, and people now are realizing that their time in Mexico may be longer than they had initially anticipated. ABBA is providing help for long-term asylum seekers, for the for amputees, as well as for migrants in transit, and they always need your help. They're a very small organization, and any money that you want, that you can provide to them, goes a long, long way. For example, a $25 donation buys shoes and a backpack for 2 migrants. A $50 donation, what does a $50 donation do? It provides medicine for an amputee for a month. It provides treatment for, it provides mental health medication, pharmaceuticals for people who have mental health issues. It provides their medication for a month, or it provides ultrasounds and maternal care for pregnant women for a whole month. $50 does all of that. If you want to up it to $75, $75 or $100, buys food for every single resident in the shelter for a whole week. So even very small donations have a huge impact. The other organization that, you know, I very much agree, I very much support, is Lawyers for Good Government. I have, in all of my work, both with the caravan and I've been to the border, I've been to Tijuana 2 times and to Brownsville, Matamoros 1 time, and Lawyers for Good Government paid for my flight and for my hotel for me to do that. They pay for Charlene's salary to do that. They paid for the lawyers to come down and help with the caravan. They also help with their travel fund move people who, once they've been let out of detention, have a place to go. What has struck me the most as in terms of the great impact is the bond. As I mentioned, Vicky, the woman who is helping the Cameroonians, put up $10,000 bond per person. And if you think about this, it's bail. So not all migrants who are in detention are eligible to get bond, but the judges have the discretion to set bond for people, and the amount of bond varies greatly. And it can be as low as a couple $1,000s, and to this case to $10,000. And it's hard to get that money. You know, of course, you can go to a bail bondsman, and many people go into debt doing that, paying off the interest on this. This is a bond fund, a national bond fund that people can contribute to. In general, if you put up money for a bond, when the asylum seeker either is granted asylum or is deported, the bond money you get back. It's to make sure that they go to their immigration court hearings. This donation to the National Immigration Detention Bond Fund is a donation. So your money will go to getting one person out of jail. When that person has completed their process, the money goes back into a fund to liberate somebody else from detention. So those are 3 really great organizations, and I highly recommend supporting any of those. The organizations in Brownsville that I mentioned, the Global Resource Management, the Resource Center of Matamoros, and Team Brownsville are all very small organizations that would absolutely benefit from any donations as well. We don't want just your money, though. We want you to do something. What can you do? You can sponsor an asylum seeker. At the same website, freedomforimmigrants.org, you can take a pledge to support immigrants in your community. If you're in the United States, this is a big ask. It's a community effort, but you can provide something. And I encourage everyone to go out and to see if there's an opportunity in your own community. And if there's not, to maybe start one, to see what you can do. But this is a great resource to help you find that information. when these Cameroonians were in detention, and I reference them because they're the most recent contact that I've had, for the last week that they were in detention, they were given bread and only bread for their meals for the day. So you can imagine what it's like for somebody in detention with no idea when they're going to be let free and with very little contact, and just sending a postcard, send a message to say that somebody's thinking about them and caring about them during this time. And I think that this is so important because, you know, when I mention the dire situation and the bleak situation that asylum seekers find themselves in legally in the United States, and just how overwhelming the task is, and how I'm just one person and you're just one person, and what we're doing seems so little and hopeless. You know, just having a letter is a huge thing. And it reminded me of this story that my best friend told me, which is about a man walking down the beach, and he's sitting on the beach and he's watching a young person walking on the beach. And as they're walking, they're bending down and they're picking up something and throwing it in the water. And they're just walking and they're bending down and picking something, throw it in the water. And as the person approaches the man, he comes and he says, "What are you doing? I've been watching you. What are you doing?" And the young person says, "Look around. There's all these starfish on the beach. I'm saving them." And the old man says, "Look at all the starfish. You're not doing anything. You're making no difference." And the person bends down, picks up a starfish, throws it in the water, and says, "I'm making a difference to this one person, to this one starfish." So I encourage you, you know, Vicky helping one Cameroonian, helping two Cameroonians is nothing in the big scheme of things. There's 35, 40,000 people needing help, but the help that she's providing for that one person is immeasurable. And I tell her this, like, she has changed the trajectory of these people's lives just by reaching out and just by doing something that is a big ask, but it is huge. She's going to help them find a lawyer. And there are so many people who don't have these resources at all. So you can be the person picking up the starfish on the beach. And that is pretty much all I have. And for my presentation, we have Dan Newspiel, who is one of the board members for the Latin American Relief Fund, online if he has any comments to ask, or if Cliff had any questions that came up in via email. I'm happy to answer those. If you have any follow-up questions, this is my email address. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer any questions or any thoughts.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. That was very informative. If you take your screen down, I will put up the screen with the email address that people will need in order to be able to get questions to you. So you can send an email to this address, global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. And I will pass your questions or comment on to Rebecca. I want to thank Rebecca for very informative presentation. And as you said at the beginning, it's not exactly optimistic. I mean, the situation that you describe for immigrants, for refugees, is a very dire one. Cruelty is the point, as you said. That's quite true. Cruelty, I mean, just incredible wanton cruelty that seems designed to make it worse to come to the US than to stay in your country where you're facing all kinds of danger.
Absolutely, especially, you know, it's been reported recently that there was in-depth discussions among Trump advisors at the beginning, you know, debating family separation, and they concluded that taking children away from parents would discourage parents from coming because it is cruel. There's that when a migrant is picked up and put into detention, They are put into what we call the ice box. And at first I thought, that's an old phrase, it's ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but also keep the temperatures in these detention centers at around 60 degrees, maybe 50, 60 degrees. It is freezing inside of these detention centers. They don't have beds. They don't have blankets. They leave the lights on all night long. So people have a hard time sleeping, and they just physically wear people down in so many ways. And every single time I think that this is the lowest that they can go. This is the worst that they can do. And then they come up with something even worse. So absolutely, the cruelty is the point.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, if that is the strategy to deter people from coming, in effect, what it amounts to is making the U.S. an S-hole country.
I think it confirms our status as such. If you look back at it, and actually the cause of these people coming, especially from the Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, the root cause of what is sending migrants to the U.S. is the U.S. Our policies, our geopolitical policies for decades, which has valued capitalism and ownership over any sort of reforms and people-focused policies, has meant that the U.S. has continuously supported dictators and authoritarians and propped up banana republics in Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and all of the countries in Central America. And when there was the U.S. propping up these dictatorial governments, caused a rush or an influx of refugees in the 80s, who then came to the U.S. Some of them got into trouble. This is the MS-13 and the gangs that are controlling Central America now were created in jails in the U.S., which were then exported under the previous administrations when they were deporting all of these criminal immigrants, deporting them to countries that the U.S. had crippled by dismantling their societal structures and their civil structures. So governments were weak, judiciary was weak, police were corrupt, and these hardened criminals then came into a country where there was no infrastructure to contain them, and then they took over. So now we are reaping the effects of what we planted 30, 40 years ago from a long time of U.S. foreign policies.
The first question has come in from Kristen Schrecker. She asks, how were asylum seekers handled before Trump, under Obama, under Bush? Were they put in penitentiaries, or were they allowed to go straight to any U.S. families?
That's a really good question, Kristen. She's actually, I want to mention, is the other person who is hosting one of those Cameroonians. They are at this very moment are en route from Arizona to Maryland with a little bit of a road trip to see the Grand Canyon, so that the Cameroonians can see some of our beautiful sides of the United States as opposed to the inside of a detention center. So how asylum seekers were treated previously? Well, first of all, according to the law, the U.S. has international and legal obligations to treat asylum seekers in a certain way, and the main one is to not return them to their countries. So yes, previously, well, the first part that was completely new under Trump is a policy called metering. So that was started a couple during the caravans, when all of these people showed up at the border. The U.S. said, oh, we can't process all of these people. We're gonna take a number and come back when it's your turn, and then you can apply for asylum. So that did not used to happen. And those meterings, it was taking months, if not, I mean, I'm talking like 3 to 7 months before somebody would even be allowed to say, help me, US. So that's new, that didn't used to happen. People were detained, but often were routinely released on a bond or with an ankle monitor, or just on their own recognizance. and they could go and, promise to go to their hearing, which it was fine because most asylum seekers, something like I believe the number is 90%, if not higher, of asylum seekers show up for their court hearings because they want the opportunity to tell their story. They want the opportunity and the chance to get protection from the United States. So it's a very, it's a low risk endeavor to allow an asylum seeker to enter the United States to pursue their cases in the United States. We've never had tent courts on the border. People have been allowed to come to the US to access their rights. So things like that's very, very different than what it has been.
We have Dan Newspiel here with us in the Zoom room. Do you have a question or comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, Rebecca, that was very inspiring talk as usual. One of the many lies that Trump has put out was that the Democratic Party is promoting open borders, which we know that they're not, and that's not part of their program. And without disputing the importance that you mentioned of voting for Biden and Harris, but just thinking beyond that in the future in a non-Trump world, I wanted to hear your comments about the concept of open borders, because it's a small but growing international movement. There have been some very well-reasoned academic treatises written about open borders or even abolishing borders. In a more ideal world, I'd like to hear what your take is on that, and if it's something to look at positively, how we get there. And maybe, and I know that Michael and Maricela are on this call, and be interesting to hear their take on that concept as well.
Certainly, Dan, that's a really good question. And there's an amazing podcast called the General Chapman's Last Stand, and I will try to get it to you, but it talked about this specifically, and it looked from a historical perspective at the evolution of militarizing and enforcing the US's southern border, which came into effect basically after the Vietnam War, when General Chapman, who had been a general in Vietnam, concluded that the reason the US lost the Vietnam War was because the borders, something to do with the borders. And so this general who had a chip on his shoulder then was put in charge of the previous Border Patrol, what did it used to be called? Not USCIS, Homeland, not even Homeland Security, Immigration, INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service. He was put in charge of that, and he decided that, prior to this, the US's southern border was very open, and there was a circular flow, mainly of seasonal workers from Mexico who would go to the US, work, make money, and go back to Mexico. And it was circular. Those who came would leave. Once the US started enforcing border restrictions and militarizing it, it raised the barriers to entry, and it made entry cost more. It made it much more dangerous and difficult to cross, so that people would go to the US to work and stay there. And there was no net zero of it. We actually, part of this podcast, they talk about a study that a university had done about the numbers, and they determined that if the US had spent zero money on enforcing its border, we would have fewer undocumented people in the United States today, because it's so hard. So if it's hard to get across the border, you have to pay a smuggler, you risk being jailed, your children can't come. So there's not the same movement that there used to be. People come, they stay, then they bring their families over, and none of them really have an opportunity to legalize their status. So they remain in this undocumented status indefinitely. So I would say for that reason, I'm very much in favor of it. Though my observation from talking with people over the years is that many of them don't want to come to the US. They would happily stay in their home countries. speaking the language, their native language, eating their foods, being with their family, if they had the opportunities to live in peace and prosperity in their home countries. So in addition, not only open borders, let's talk super fantasy world. I would say spend all that money and go and put it into improving the conditions and the society and the support and infrastructure in the countries that are sending the most refugees so that they don't have to leave. I'm also very interested in hearing Michael and Maricella's take on this question.
Can I make a comment on that?
Please.
One of the statements that Trump often made from the very beginning of his presidency, saying, with open borders, we won't have our country anymore, won't have our nation. And that statement always puzzled me. How would it be that you would no longer have a nation if there were open borders? And then I realized, no, the emphasis was not on the border. It's that with open borders, we wouldn't have our nation, namely a white nation. It was exactly the fear of a coloring of the U.S. population that he was appealing to in such statements.
And that's always been the sentiment, right? I mean, talking from the Italians that came, the Germans, the Japanese, the Chinese, there's always somebody that you want to vilify and make the scapegoat for whatever problems that you have. Absolutely.
Were there other comments that?
Maricela, Michael, did you want to say something?
I would like to say something. You know, the Obama administration didn't have a good record regarding the handling of asylum seekers. The unaccompanied minors, there were hundreds of unaccompanied minors that were not catered well for their needs. The US traditionally has had a very difficult approach towards Central Americans. And you are right, nobody will move from their country if they would have a good situation. And the other, if the money would be invested in creating conditions for them to remain. That's, I think, the main point. But also, the more difficult you make to cross borders, you just put more difficulties for the people trying to cross them. Because if they have a difficult situation, if they are being persecuted in their home, they are going to do everything they can to cross, and they only will find harder situation. And who benefits from that? The traffickers and the others who help them and who benefited financially, all the cartels and all those who benefit financially from that. So, solution, address the root causes, definitely. Definitely more a flexible approach that enables people who need protection to cross and recognize those needs. But I must say the US indeed had a better policy before, but it was by no means perfect. We had many cases that, there were many cases that should have been recognized and were not, but they found a way to remain in the United States. So let's leave it at that, maybe. Okay, thank you.
To put into context, Maricela worked for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees throughout her career and has been stationed throughout the world. So it's very, very knowledgeable about this topic, and I appreciate that she's here.
I just would like to add some other thing that concerns me as a Mexican, that the US is passing the responsibility of border control to Mexico. Mexico is now the wall. Mexico has the responsibility and the guilt to prevent the movement of people. And although it keeps the door open for asylum seekers, it's not putting all the money it must to process those cases speedily. And I think that we need to address. As Mexican, I feel my government needs to get its act together, needs to destinate much more funds to Comar, so that more people, the ones that cannot pass, and should be protected receive the protection, if not in the US, then in Mexico. But with that border control that Mexico has taken comes some responsibility. And I don't think we are taking that responsibility as seriously as we must. Thank you.
That's a good point, Maricela. Thank you.
Mentioning the United Nations, I wonder with the very precarious situation that that refugees and have, along the border, camped there for prolonged periods of time. Where's the United Nations? Are they stepping forward to helping people? Why not?
Without being offensive, yeah, and Maricela.
Yes, well, I think there is a lot of lobby work being done. There is indeed, I believe, much more work needs to be done, that is for sure. But there is quite a lot of action precisely at the southern Mexican border. And a number of challenges to the Instituto Nacional de Migración, the National Institute of Migration, to release and to treat migrants fairly has taken place in courts. And currently, there is a judge that has already warned the National Institute of Migration that it needs to comply with that. But there are a number of political challenges, I must say, in Mexico that need to be overcome. And I must say that also the trends worldwide for refugee protection are extremely challenging. But that's a subject for another discussion probably, and I will be happy to participate in that if that takes place.
I think as far as the UN's involvement goes, my just observing, during the caravans, we were there, the group of caravans came in, their plan was to stay at that place one night and then leave the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. Midday, a couple of representatives from the UN came through to evaluate and assess what might be needed so that they could come back the next day with the things that they decided they needed. But by then the migrants had already moved on. So I think with a large organization, a huge global organization, and any of these large international NGOs are too big to be able to respond rapidly to situations like this. I mean, obviously right now, my belief is that, on the border, they could be doing more. And Maricela, please chime in. You're muted though.
Yeah, I believe that a lot of the funding that you see in many NGOs, especially those doing advocacy work, comes from the United Nations. And
Yes.
UNHCR has been very crucial in developing networks, not only for advocacy and legal work, but also the shelters. I mean, Rotterdam and many shelters receive substantial funds to keep it running. And they have also done a lot of capacity building. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of work being done behind the scenes and also directly. But there is a big effort there. I think the NGOs today are much stronger than they were a few years ago. And indeed, much more needs to be done for sure in advocacy terms. But
that's a really good point.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you, Maricela. And I apologize, I take that back because UNHCR is very instrumental actually in supporting Albergue ABA. They just got solar panels and a hot water heater, so things like that. Absolutely. So let me take back any sort of disparaging remarks about UNHCR.
No, most importantly, they are paying about 50% of the staff of Comar to make decisions, to accelerate the decisions. So there's quite a lot being done, but much more from the government needs to be done.
To clarify, Comar is the Mexican government agency that determines whether somebody is a refugee or not and grants them refugee status. On
this question of what Mexico is doing, AMLO has this program of helping to provide employment opportunities in Central American countries so that people will have less need to leave. What can you tell us about that?
About the program itself?
Yes.
You know, I think, well, a lot of things have come to a standstill because of the virus. You know, quite a lot of things are really on hold. But I think that for any program of work of employment to work, you also need a number of minimum conditions of security in a country. And I think El Salvador, Honduras are some way from that. And how to go about it is a $64,000 question. How do you achieve the minimum conditions so that jobs are distributed fairly and that the people that need it and are the qualified people get those jobs? There are some trends, you know, that put some things into doubt, but I don't want to have I don't have a crystal ball in front of me and not sufficient practical knowledge to comment anymore. Thank you.
I would add to that my observation from speaking with Central Americans, a lot of them leave because they're being extorted by the gangs because they have employment, because they have steady income. So unless you get rid of that criminality element, you know, I mean, I think that's the hugest drain on the economy of these countries, because they can't, you know, if you make $20 a week and you have to pay 5 of it to the gangs, they're not doing anything. And, you know, and people have left jobs because of that. And I think it has a very, very negative effect on employment. Just so, as Maricela said, there's a lot of different parts that need to be put into place. Employment is only one very small part of it, but I think it has to all go at the same time. So how do you do all this? How do you start a whole new country all at once?
A question has come in here from Cher Davidson, which I will put up on the screen for you to read. We saw the effects of these US policies when we were doing humanitarian aid work in El Salvador post-Civil War. Important to note, gangs did not start in El Salvador. They were exported when families who had been given temporary asylum during the war and lived in poor barrios in Los Angeles, after 12 years, they were deported. Their children had grown up in the gang world of MS-13 and other notorious gangs. They were unprepared for life back in El Salvador. They were tattooed and could not get jobs, etc. Yes, let's put money back into those countries, into development projects that give education and jobs. Comments?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Education, jobs, but also civil society, you know, non-corrupt police. You know, a very common comment that I hear from asylum seekers, because the US wants to know, did you seek protection from your country before asking us for protection? And so what that means is, did you report the crime to the police? And generally the answer is no, because reporting the crime to the police is basically telling the gangs that you are snitching on them, and it opens people up to so much more. And all of these concepts are completely foreign to Americans. Like, just the idea that you wouldn't call the police if something happens. I guess, you know, obviously, unless you're a Black person, you're obviously going to have questions about that. For the general, the expectation is that the police is not going to be corrupt. They're not going to inform the criminal that you have reported them. So there's so much more. And then, you know, the judiciary system, the judges are equally corrupt. Everybody's in the pocket, the politicians. So there's a whole lot to unwrap and a whole lot to create if we want to start over. And I don't know how to do that.
Dan, did you have anything further at the moment?
I just wanted to mention that we've heard a bit about Albergaba in Celaya and Pastor Ignacio. And for those viewers who are interested, the Latin American Relief Fund is sponsoring a seminar in a couple of weeks on Thursday, September 24th, starting at 5 p.m. Central Time, where Pastor Ignacio will be presenting and talking about his work. So I would encourage all of you to tune in. If you want to find a link for that seminar, go to the website of the Latin American Relief Fund, which is latinamericanrelieffund.org.
Thank you, Dan.
Mhm. A question about a more hopeful future in a post-Trump time. Do you see significant changes in U.S. Policies under a Biden administration?
I would hope so. I was also very optimistic when Obama was elected and all the great immigration reforms that were going to happen. I think that Biden has a much harder and a steeper slope to face because it's easy to take things away and it's so much harder to reestablish them. So all of these rules and policies that the Trump administration has established, I think it's going to be hard to unwind a lot of those things. Just like, we all take our shoes off when we go to the airport. Can we imagine a day when we don't do that again? So once you do something in the name of security and in the name of public safety, I think it's really hard to undo those things. But yes, absolutely. I mean, I hope so. I don't know.
Well, on this and on so many other matters, a Biden administration would spend its first year just signing executive orders, undoing the damage that has been done in so many aspects of our life. The job is immense.
If I may comment, all the previous U.S. administrations have had a slot for refugees. That means resettled refugees that were recognized in Turkey or in Syria, or not in Syria, from Syria in Lebanon, for example, or refugees like the Cameroonians recognized somewhere else, or from Burma recognized in Thailand. And the US had very good quotas for that in the past. Obama increased it substantially and got up to 90,000 refugees. I think that will be still an easier door to open. And I think that is a possibility because at the moment that door is closed and it's an important aspect. So if other doors, probably as Rebecca said, the Central American issues, the Mexico issues will be a bit tougher to handle immediately. But that other door is very likely, it's easier to open. And to allow many refugees that are really waiting for an opportunity in that regard for resettlement.
That's a good point. Thank you, Maricela.
Here is another question that has come in from Sheila Reed. Is there any chance of expanding the mandate of the International Criminal Court to include many of the crimes committed in the worldwide refugee crisis, in particular, the separating of mothers and their children at the US border?
Really good question, Sheila. Maricela, do you have any thoughts on that?
The US is not a signatory to the covenant establishing the International Court. So no way. They have been very firm on that. They have attacked the court consistently, and I don't see much hope on that account. But indirectly, maybe, but not in the International Criminal Court.
Well, even beyond that, the U.S. has now imposed sanctions on the officials of the International Criminal Court. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I don't like your court, I'm not going to be bound by it. Another to say, I'm going to punish people who are employees of the court. It's outrageous.
Outrageous. I agree with you. Outrageous.
But we've become used to outrageous in the last 3.5 years, unfortunately. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wishes to make? Last call for those who want to email in a question. And don't be bashful. You can, here, let me put that email address up on the screen again. It's global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. So get your questions in before we end in a few minutes.
I want to end on somewhat of an up note somehow. This is
Okay.
I don't know. Does anybody have any nice thing to say?
Well, this is Labor Day. And it is a day that we honor working people. And we should include in that honoring all of those who are seeking to come to the United States in order to work.
As well as the people who are working in the United States undocumented and how they are the essential workers in so many cases. They're picking the crops in the fields as the fires, the forest fires in California is blackening the skies. They're the ones going to the meat packing plants that are suffering large scale breakouts. They are the foundation upon which our country runs 100%.
By the way, that reminds me that in 2 weeks, our webinar is going to be to focus on farm workers fight the coronavirus. David Bacon, who is a well-known photographer, will be speaking and showing his photographs and talking about how coronavirus is affecting farm workers in the US. So don't miss that. 2 weeks from today on the, what is that, the 21st of September. Well, seeing no further questions coming in by email tells me that we've exhausted the discussion for now. I want to thank Rebecca and Marcella also, Dan, who also helped out, for very interesting discussion. And I hope that our listeners enjoyed today's program. You should know that all of our revenue-raising programs have been canceled due to the coronavirus. Nevertheless, we are continuing to pay our Mexican staff. So if you can make a tax-deductible donation, please do so at our website. The website is globaljusticecenter.org. You will find there also the schedule of upcoming events. These webinars are weekly, every Monday at 1 o'clock. And you can find there the video recording of past webinars. There's a lot of good material there. So if you missed some of our previous ones, you can still go back and view them. I want to thank our Global Justice team that makes these webinars possible. They include Betsy Bowman, Liz Mestras, Gregory Diamond, Roberto Robles, Colette Mora, and Olivia Canellas. We have a special webinar coming up this this Wednesday, and let me unmute Roberto and ask you to announce that.
All right. As Cliff mentioned, we have a very important, well, a very important subject matter to treat. This is the webinar is this coming Wednesday, September 9th at 3 p.m. It's gonna be held in Spanish. It's mostly for the Spanish-speaking community, but anyways, it's a very important topic. I guess in San Miguel de Allende, the most important issue we have to face, we have to deal with, is regarding to the water. Okay, so this coming Wednesday, we're gonna have two speakers, two knowledgeable speakers related to the possibility of a new law, new water law, federal law, in order that people have a saying of its use as the distribution. So it's gonna be very important. So all of you are invited to attend this webinar. The channel, the media is the regular one through this website, Global Justice Center.org at 3 p.m. Thank you very much.
Mhm. And that, of course, will be in Spanish.
Ajá. Entonces, este miércoles 9 de septiembre tendremos un seminario del Centro para la Justicia Global en español sobre el tema importantísimo por resolver en San Miguel de Allende que se refiere al agua. Estamos en un lugar de estrés hídrico extremo. Entonces es un tema que tenemos que resolver y una posibilidad real, auténtica, puede ser que se apruebe la nueva ley federal, nueva ley general del agua, con participación ciudadana. Entonces, para tratar este tema contamos con dos expertas, Leticia Merino, por parte de la UNAM, y Margarita Gutiérrez Vizcaíno, de una organización que tiene mucho trabajo realizado en Chiapas, que se llama Cántaro Azul. Entonces, están ustedes cordialmente invitados a participar en este seminario, este 9 de septiembre, pasado mañana a las 3 de la tarde. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. If you take down that screen, I would have a screen about our event next Monday, a special webinar on joining hands in solidarity, mutual accompaniment, and effective conviviality. These presentations will be based upon research done by two psychologists, Maria Ciafalo and Mary Watkins. That's at 1 o'clock next Monday. Don't miss it. And stay tuned for future webinars every Monday coming from the Center for Global Justice. And let me finally then give a great expression of appreciation to Rebecca for her very informative presentation today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Cliff, for having me.
And goodbye for now.
It looks like we're clear.
I think Roberto is, have you ended the
Yeah,
live?
sure.
Yes, okay.